Welcome to Middle Earth, otherwise known as Iceland. This place is beautiful. I'm lying down beside a magical lake in the national park, and I just wanted to take a moment here to thank you guys. Sorry if the sun is kind of blocking the view, but I wanted to thank you guys for telling me to come here. It's really, truly a magical place and a place I needed to come to, and I really appreciate everyone that told me that I should come here. I also, in gratitude, I wanted to tell you guys a story that I think comes from Iceland, but it's up for you guys to decide. So this is called the Lay of Leithian, and it used to be a song, but now it's a story. So long ago, in the days of Middle Earth, when men were not far long come to that land, there lived a great power in the north by the name of Morgoth. He was a dark lord, of whom Sauron was only a lieutenant, and he made war upon the elves and the men ferociously. The elves were his sworn enemy, for he had taken from them something that they held to be most precious, and these were the Silmarils of Fëanor that were made in the days of old. The Silmarils held the only light of the tree Telperion, and that tree Laurelin, the golden and the silver trees, and that is the only light that is still alive in Middle-earth from that ancient realm. Now Morgoth kept the Silmarils in his fortress in the north called Angbad, and they were surrounded by all his dark majesty. Now there came a time, after a peace of many years, that Morgoth brought forth his power into the realms of Middle-earth. And there was sudden battle, and he made flames belch forth from the mountains of Thangorodrim, the mountains of iron. And before the flames came glowering the king of the dragons, and behind him were Balrog's evil dark spirits, and behind them came the orcs, legions and legions of orcs. And the elves fled before them, for they were outnumbered, and the men had to flee too, and many lands that were once blessed and holy were taken and made foul by the servants of Morgoth. Now there was a place called Dorthonion in the highlands, not far away from Angbad, and it used to be a home for Berahir and his son Beren. But they were driven back and sore put to even fight the many legions of orcs that came into that land and tried to drive them away. Finally, their women, who until then had fought before them, had to flee and take the children into the south, and soon there remained only a small band of rebels. Beren and Berahir were at their command, and there was only 12 of them. They did many great deeds in that land, including saving King Finrod Felagond, one of the king of the elves, from death, and he swore his allegiance to them from then on, and even gave them his ring as a sign of his loyalty. But things were not good for this band of outlaws. Berahir sent his son ahead on a dangerous mission one night to go and spy on the enemy. But he had not been gone 3 days when, lying in the woods asleep, he had visions of dark crows with blood in their beaks, and they came and surrounded him and mocked him and laughed at him. And Beren knew he must go back to his father. He rode back to where they were camped by the lake Tarn Alwyn. And there he found that his father and his companions had been discovered, and their bodies lay in a mound. Then Beren, son of Berahir, wept and buried the bodies and buried his father, and grief came upon him, and he swore an oath of revenge. He set off after the orc host that had killed his greatest friends, and he found them that night making boast of their deeds. Rage and anger overcame him, and he came out into the midst of their fire, and he slew the great orc chief, and he took back the hand of his father with the ring of Felagon still on it, and he ran back into the forest and was defended by fate, for the arrows of the orcs flew wild. Now for many years Beren lived in that land, and he became the friend of birds and beasts, and from that day on he would not hunt them or kill them, and he ate no meat. But he was hard-pressed, he was fearless and daring, but so far outnumbered, and finally even he too was driven out of his homeland, the last of his kind. Desperate and destitute, he made up into the mountains, known as the Mountains of Terror, to the south of that land. And from the tops of their peaks he espied Doriath, the hidden elven kingdom, and he thought that he would go there. No one knows how he found a way through the grim mountains of terror, and he does not speak of it to this day, lest the horror come back into his mind. For there were fell things in those mountains, great monsters that were born ere the coming of the sun and the coming of the moon to Middle-earth. Terrible spiders that wove their nets between the trees, where light itself could not escape. But Beren, perhaps he was the only one, found a way through the dark paths of those mountains, and finally, bent as if an old man, he came into the forest of Doriath, that was shut to mortal man by the powers of Queen Melian, who had enchanted the land, and yet a great doom was on Beren, and he found his way into that hidden realm. There he wandered in the forests of Neldareth, lost, alone, and hopeless, with neither kin nor friends to turn to. But as he was camped one night, he saw, in a green glade in the forest, a beautiful maiden, with hair as black as a raven that fell down to her feet, and eyes grey like starlight on a summer evening. And Beren was enchanted, but he could not speak and looked at her, and as he made to move, she disappeared and fled back into the forest. Then it seemed that grief overtook him, as one who has seen the light and then has it stolen away. Still he wandered in the forests, and several months later he found her again, as a star upon a hill in winter, as leaves in the wind in autumn, and he called to her, calling her Tinuviel, nightingale, for he knew not her real name. But she slipped from his grasp and wandered away into the forests, and darkness came again upon Beren. But there came a time in the spring when he was at the river's edge, the river that runs through Doriath, and he saw her again. And she stood upon a green hill, and she lifted her voice and broke into song. And it seemed to Beren as if the dark trees grew wild and green with her singing, and the flowers sprang up from the grass, and the sky turned from grey to blue. For it was as a lark pours out its song in the dying light of the night and brings the morning. Such was the song of Tinuviel. And Beren fell in love, and he called out to her, calling her nightingale. And this time she saw him and did not run. And she came to him and looked at him, and doom came upon her, and she fell in love. Bright and beautiful is the song of Lúthien Tinuviel, It breaks the bonds of winter and restores the earth to summer and beauty. She is as lovely as any elven maiden has ever been, and Beren was a great man, and together they spent many happy months wandering through the forests of Neldoreth in the hidden kingdom of Doriath, and their happiness was very great. But Darion, the minstrel, who was also in love with Lúthien, espied their meetings one time, and he brought them back to Menegroth, the king of Thingol, her father, and the king of that land, and he told him what he had seen. And Thingol, loving his daughter very much, was not pleased that she was with a mortal man, for elves are immortal, and they do not mix that way with the race of men. And so he commanded that Beren be brought before him. Lúthien, however, heard of this, and she intercepted the servants of her father, and then she came before him and demanded that she would only bring Beren to him if he was treated with respect and not hurt or captured. Her father agreed, and Lúthien led Beren before the king herself. When Beren entered the great hall of Menegroth, he was astounded. Never had he seen such beauty and riches, crystal floors, lamps of pure gold and crystal, beautiful moss-covered blankets. It was an enchanted kingdom where the elves lived, and he could barely speak. He was so overcome with awe. Therefore they brought him before King Thingol, and King Thingol was angry. "How dare you come here, mortal man? Do you know where you are? Do you know who this is? This is Lúthien, my daughter, and this is my kingdom. We do not allow beggars in here. What have you to say for yourself?" Sorry. Beren did not know what to say, and he looked into the eyes of Queen Melian. And it seemed that a message passed between them, and suddenly words came to him. And he said, "I am Beren, son of Berahir. I have walked through the mountains of terror, and before that I fought alone against the hosts of Morgoth in the north. I am not a beggar. I may be a mortal man, but I have come into this kingdom, whether through my own will or some greater will, I know not. All I know is that I love your daughter, and if she would have it, I would make her mine." Now the kingdom that was gathered in the halls of Menegroth were astounded, for usually such words would bring death upon any stranger. And King Thingol looked at him and said, "Your words have earned you death." But Lúthien stood up and said, "Nay, father, this is a great man, and I would have him to be my husband, for I am in love with him." Then Thingol was less than pleased, and he said, "Beren, son of Berahir, you are deserving of death, and I would not give you my daughter. I too desire something I cannot have. We cannot always get what we want. I want the Silmarils that are held within the deep fortress of Angbad, guarded by the servants of Morgoth. If you can bring me one of these Silmarils, yea, and hold it up in your hand, then you shall have my daughter to wed, but only then. Get thee gone." Then all the host looked at him and looked to see what Beren would do, but he laughed. "For little do elven kings sell their daughters," he said, "for trinkets and jewels. Yea, I will take on this mission, and the next time you see me, King Thingol, in my hand I shall hold a Silmaril. And then with your blessing, Lúthien shall be mine." Then he departed out of Doriath and set off on his mission. And he looked again into the eyes of Melian, and she was silent, but a message passed across them. And he bade farewell to Lúthien, and she looked deep into his eyes, and sadness came upon her, for she knew this was an almost desperate mission. In all the years the elves had been in Middle-earth, they hadn't even espied from afar the jewels of Fëanor, nor broken into Angbad, that great and dark fortress of old. Yet Beren decided he must do what he must do, and he left Doriath on his perilous mission. Part 1.